Laudetur Jesus Christus. Praised be Jesus Christ. And welcome to this live broadcast from the Hall of Blessings here in the Vatican. Pope Francis is arriving for his meeting here this morning with the members of the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See. As you can see, if you're joining us on television, the Pope is arriving here in the Hall of Blessings, which is right in the facade of St. Peter's Basilica. So it's right behind the front windows that you see when you're looking at St. Peter's. He stops to greet the Dean, who is the Ambassador of Cyprus to the Holy See. And from wherever you're joining us, I'd like to welcome you all to this live broadcast. Some of you may be joining us through various Vatican media channels, perhaps the Vatican Audio Live Events app, or the Radio Vaticana app, the Vatican News web portal, or the Vatican News English YouTube channel or Facebook live feed. We also welcome all of you who are joining us through various broadcasters around the world, including EWTN TV, Salt and Light TV, Atma Darshan TV India, Shalom World Television Networks USA, Catholic Faith Network, Luminous Radio in India, UCTV, Uganda Catholic Television, and Catholic TV. My name is Devin Watkins, and I will be providing the translation of the Holy Father's audience here this morning. And we see Mr. Georgios F. Poulides, who is the Ambassador of Cyprus and the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, accredited to the Holy See. He will be greeting the Holy Father.
Nos meilleurs vœux de bonne santé et de poursuite fructueuse de votre mission apostolique.
Most Holy Father, I have the great honor to present to you, as Dean of the Diplomatic Corps accredited to the Holy See, our best wishes for good health and the fruitful continuation of your apostolic mission. Allow me to begin our meeting by sparing a thought for all the people, women, children, and the elderly who around the world suffer from wars and conflicts. Some diplomats present here represent countries in serious situations. The Third World War fought piecemeal, which you have mentioned several times in recent years, is an increasingly evident reality before our dismayed eyes and for our powerless hands.
À plusieurs reprises, vous nous avez appelés à être des artisans de paix au service des peuples.
On several occasions, you have called on us to be artisans of peace in the service of peoples and the common good, by overcoming our particularisms and working for a diplomacy of dialogue that is capable of seeking what unites and rejecting what divides. I would like to thank you, Holy Father, for continually suggesting ways and actions to resolve the many problems of our contemporary world, and for warning us with foresight of tomorrow's challenges for which we should start preparing.
Sainteté, avant d'autres, vous avez senti les vents des tempêtes actuelles à leur portée mondiale. Certains défis potentiels ont, au fil du temps,
Your Holiness, before others, you sensed the winds of the current storms and their global reach. Certain potential challenges have, over time, taken the form of real humanitarian, climactic, economic, and military crises, requiring common and multilateral responses, as you have repeatedly suggested.
À l'occasion de votre voyage en Hongrie en avril dernier.
I would like to recall in this assembly the words you spoke during your trip to Hungary last April. Peace will never come from the pursuit of particular strategic interests, but from policies capable of looking at the whole the development of all, attentive to people, to the poor, and to tomorrow.
Sainteté, le monde dans sa globalité où nous vivons nous oblige aujourd'hui à réfléchir ensemble et nous
Your
inviter à
Holiness,
croire de nouveau
the world in its entirety where we live today forces us to think together
latérale.
and invites us
Les
to
questions
believe again
telles
in
que
the
la
values
crise climatique,
of multilateral
certaines
diplomacy.
questions concernant l'avenir
Current issues, such as the climate crisis, and certain questions concerning the immediate future, such as the use of artificial intelligence, require common approaches and
car
unity,
les conséquences sont
as
globales.
the consequences are global.
À l'occasion
On the occasion of World
mondiale
Peace
de la
Day,
paix, le
on
1er janvier
January 1st, 2024,
vous avez suggéré
you suggested that scientific
scientifique et technique
and technical
doit être
research
orientée
must
vers la
be
recherche de la
directed
paix et du
towards
bien commun,
the search for
au
peace
service du développement intégral
and
et de l'homme
the common
et de la
good, in the
communauté.
service of the integral development of
Très Saint-Père,
humanity and the
vous êtes
community.
conscient des grandes possibilités,
Most Holy Father,
mais aussi des
you are
grands
aware of the great
risques
possibilities,
du développement technologique.
but also the great risks
C'est
of
pourquoi vous
technological
avez
development.
souligné qu'il
That is
appartient
why
à la
you have
politique
emphasized that it is up to politics and international organizations to regulate the use
l'utilisation de nouveaux
of new
outils
tools
que
that
l'intelligence
human intelligence
humaine
brings
fait
forth,
naître.
focusing
En se
on
concentrant sur
fundamental,
les valeurs éthiques
ethical,
et sociales
and social
fondamentales.
values.
Sainteté, depuis le début de votre pontificat, vous avez porté une attention particulière à la crise
Your Holiness,
climatique.
since the
qui se
beginning of
dessine.
your pontificate, you have paid particular attention to the emerging climate
De
crisis.
l'encyclique Laudato Si,
8 years after the publication of the encyclical Laudato Si, faced with the too slow progress of the international community and the intensification of extreme climate events, you felt the need to react by publishing the apostolic exhortation Laudate Deum
le 23 octobre
on October 4th, 2023.
La destruction de l'environnement,
The destruction of the environment,
climatique, les inondations
climate change,
et les incendies de plus en
increasingly
plus fréquents
frequent
aux
floods,
allures apocalyptiques
and fires of
frappent
apocalyptic
l'ensemble de
proportions
l'humanité.
affect all humanity.
Mais ce sont les personnes
But it is to the most vulnerable people who
qui
suffer the
qui
most
en
from the
subissent
consequences.
le plus de conséquences. Pour reprendre vos paroles,
To quote your
il s'agit
words,
d'un problème
this
social
is a
global,
global social problem,
intimement lié
intimately
à la
linked to the
dignité
dignity of
de
human
la vie
life.
humaine.
It is therefore necessary to
nécessaire
generate a model
De
of
générer un modèle de diplomatie
multilateral diplomacy
multilatérale, capable
capable
d'établir
of establishing
des règles
universal
universelles
and effective
efficaces
rules to ensure
garantir
this
cette
global
protection mondiale.
protection.
Cet appel a également été retiré lors de la conférence des partis des Nations Unies, plus connue sous le nom de COP.
This call was also reiterated at the United Nations Conference of the Parties, better known as COP28, which was held in Dubai from November 30th to December 12th, 2023. Be the architects of a policy that provides concrete and coherent responses. This is what power is for, to serve.
Vous avez également lancé au cours de votre voyage
Most Holy Father, during your trip to Mongolia, you also launched an invitation to a collective effort to protect our common home. You invited us to rediscover harmony with the environment.
Peuvent faire beaucoup pour atteindre l'objectif d'unir les progrès techniques de la dimension.
Religions can do much to achieve the goal of uniting technological process with the spiritual dimension. On the path you have walked as a pilgrim of reconciliation and peace, your travels in Africa, and in particular in the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan, cannot go unnoticed. On the continent where humanity was born, on this diverse land with incredible resources of the biosphere and subsoil, there is still too much exploitation. That is why, as you said during the meeting with the authorities in Kinshasa, we need a diplomacy of people for people, where at the center is not a control of areas and resources, but opportunities for peoples to develop.
Nous avons suivi Saint-Père à Djouba, au Soudan du Sud, où vous avez apporté un message œcuménique de paix et d'espérance.
We followed you, Holy Father, to Juba in South Sudan, where you brought an ecumenical message of peace and hope, addressing the hearts and minds of its inhabitants who have suffered for years from the devastating consequences of the persistent fallout of the conflict. You urge them to change pace, to start sailing in calm waters by resuming dialogue. Allow me, Your Holiness, to extend a wish to the peoples of this extraordinary land by borrowing your words. May Africa be the protagonist of its destiny. In tracing the paths you have left on the lands of our planet and in the spiritual fields of our souls, we are obliged to remember how many people lose their lives during migrations, fleeing wars and conflicts, moving away from arid lands and urban centers without a future, and how many of them, unfortunately, find death in the Mediterranean. You have ceaselessly exhorted the international community, Europe in particular, to return to the founding values of community thought. In Marseille, at the end of the work of the Mediterranean meetings, you invited us to an open-mindedness that opposes the shipwreck of civilization and allows this sea not to be a cemetery or a barrier, but a laboratory of peace and welcome.
Que vous avez eu avec la nouvelle génération à Lisbonne.
Most Holy Father, allow me to conclude by recalling the meeting you had with the new generations in Lisbon on the occasion of the 37th World Youth Day. You recognize in young people a positive force and energy that can change the future of this sick world. And there is an urgent need for it. Who are the main artisans of this change? Young people from all over the world. An intergenerational dialogue must be established that does not wipe the slate clean of the past, but promotes ties between young and old. Only in this way can we hope to inspire good politics that corrects economic imbalances and invests in the future with foresight. Most Holy Father, please accept our most fervent wishes for a happy new year and good health. I would like to thank you on behalf of the diplomatic family near the Holy See, to the
que
Holy
je
See,
représente en tant que
which I
doyen,
represent as Dean,
pour la
for the
force
strength you
que
have
vous
given
avez
us
donnée au cours de
over
l'année écoulée
the past year,
et pour la
and
confiance
for the
que
confidence that,
dans ce monde de
in this
souffrance
world of
qui est le
suffering that
nôtre,
is ours,
un avenir
a better
meilleur
future is
est
possible.
possible. Merci très
Thank you,
Saint-Père,
Most Holy
pour
Father,
votre travail
for your
inlassable.
tireless work,
Espérance
hope
pour tant
for
de
so
peuples,
many peoples,
tant d'hommes
so many
et de femmes.
men and women.
Merci.
Thank you. And that was His Excellency Mr. Georgios F. Polides. He is the ambassador of Cyprus, accredited to the Holy See, and he is the dean of the diplomatic corps, accredited to the Holy See. And that is the purpose of our meeting here this morning, the Pope's encounter in the Hall of Blessings. This is his annual greetings to the diplomatic corps. This speech that he is about to give is commonly known as his State of the World address. He typically goes through various challenges that are facing the world and enumerating the conflicts and the areas that he sees as important for growth. And we see the Holy Father preparing.
Eccellenze, signori, signori, sono lieto di accogliervi stamani per salutarvi personalmente.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to welcome you this morning and to extend my personal greetings and good wishes for the new year. In a special way, I thank His Excellency, Ambassador George Polides, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, for his kind words, which eloquently express the concerns of the international community at the beginning of a year that we hope to be one of peace, but has instead dawned amid conflicts and divisions. Our meeting is a fitting occasion for me to thank you for your efforts to foster good relations between the Holy See and your respective countries. Last year, our diplomatic family became even larger, thanks to the establishment of diplomatic relations with the Sultanate of Oman and the appointment of its first ambassador, who is here present. Here I would note that the Holy See has now appointed a resident papal representative in Hanoi, following last July's conclusion of the relative agreement on the status of the papal representative. This is a sign of the intent to pursue the process already initiated in a spirit of reciprocal respect and trust, thanks also to frequent contacts on the institutional level and to cooperate with the local church. 2023 also saw the ratification of the supplementary agreement to the 24th of September 1998 agreement between the Holy See and Kazakhstan on mutual relations, which facilitated the presence and work of pastoral agents in that country. The past year also marked the celebration of significant anniversaries: the 100th anniversary of the diplomatic relations with the Republic of Panama, the 70th anniversary of those with the Islamic Republic of Iran, the 60th of those with the Republic of Korea, and the 50th of those with Australia.
Cari ambasciatori, c'è una parola che risuona in modo particolare nelle due principali feste cristiane.
Dear ambassadors, one word in particular resounds in the two principal Christian feasts. We hear it in the song of the angels who proclaimed in the night of the birth of the Savior, and we hear it again in the greeting of the risen Jesus. That word is peace. Peace is primarily a gift of God, for it is He who has left us His peace. Yet it is also a responsibility incumbent upon all of us. Blessed are the peacemakers. A word so simple, yet so demanding and rich in meaning. Today I would like to concentrate our reflections on peace, at a moment in history when it is increasingly threatened, weakened, and in part lost.
D'altronde è compito della Santa Sede in seno alla comunità internazionale
For that matter, it is the responsibility of the Holy See within the international community to be a prophetic voice and to appeal to consciences. On Christmas Eve 1944, Pope Pius XII delivered a memorable radio message to the peoples of the world. The Second World War was drawing to a close after more than 5 years of conflict, and humanity sensed, in the Pope's words, an ever more clear and firm will to make of this world war, this universal upheaval, the starting point for a new era marked by profound renewal.
80 anni dopo, la spinta a quel rinnovamento profondo sembra essersi
Some 80 years later, the impetus for that profound renewal appears to have receded, and our world is witnessing a growing number of conflicts that are slowly turning into what I have often called a third world war fought piecemeal, into a genuine global conflict. Here in your presence, in this place, I cannot fail to reiterate my deep concern regarding the events taking place in Israel and Palestine. All of us remain shocked by the October 7th attack on the Israeli people, in which great numbers of innocent persons were horribly wounded, tortured and murdered, and many taken hostage. I renew my condemnation of this act and of every instance of terrorism and extremism. This is not the way to resolve disputes between peoples. Those disputes are only aggravated and cause suffering for everyone. Indeed, the attack provoked a strong Israeli military response in Gaza that has led to the death of tens of thousands of Palestinians, mainly civilians, including many young people and children, and has caused an exceptionally grave humanitarian crisis and inconceivable suffering. To all the parties involved, I renew my appeal for a ceasefire on every front, including Lebanon, and the immediate liberation of all the hostages held in Gaza. I ask that the Palestinian people receive humanitarian aid, and that hospitals, schools, and places of worship receive all necessary protection.
Percorra con determinazione la soluzione dei due stati, uno israeliano e uno palestinese.
It is my hope that the international community will pursue with determination the solution of two states, one Israeli and one Palestinian, as well as an internationally guaranteed special status for the city of Jerusalem, so that Israelis and Palestinians may finally live in peace and security.
Destabilizza ulteriormente una regione fragile e carica di tensioni. The
present conflict in Gaza further destabilizes a fragile and tension-filled region. In particular, we cannot forget the Syrian people, living in a situation of economic and political instability aggravated by last February's earthquake. May the international community encourage the parties involved to undertake a constructive and serious dialogue and to seek new solutions so that the Syrian people need no longer suffer as a result of international sanctions. In addition, I express my profound distress for the millions of Syrian refugees still present in neighboring countries like Jordan and Lebanon. I think in a special way of the beloved Lebanese people, and I express my concern for the social and economic situation that they are experiencing. It is my hope that the institutional stalemate that has even further burdened them will be resolved, and that the land of cedars will soon have a president. Remaining on the Asian continent, I would also call the attention of the international community to Myanmar and plead that every effort be made to offer hope to that land and a dignified future to its young, while at the same time not neglecting the humanitarian emergency that the Rohingya continue to experience.
Come ho potuto sperimentare nel corso del viaggio in Mongolia, alle cui autorità rinnovo la mia gratitudine per l'accoglienza.
Alongside these complex situations, there are also signs of hope, as I was able to experience in the course of my journey to Mongolia, to whose authorities I once more express my gratitude for their welcome. I also wish to thank the Hungarian authorities for the hospitality I received during my visit to that country last April. It was a journey to the heart of Europe, rich in history and culture, where I have felt the affection of many people, yet sensed the proximity of a conflict that we would have considered unimaginable in the Europe of the 21st century. Sadly, after nearly 2 years of large-scale war waged by the Russian Federation against Ukraine, the greatly desired peace has not yet managed to take roots in minds and hearts, despite the great numbers of victims and the massive destruction. One cannot allow the persistence of a conflict that continues to metastasize to the detriment of millions of persons. It is necessary to put an end to the present tragedy through negotiations in respect for international law.
Esprimo preoccupazione anche per la stessa situazione nel Caucaso meridionale tra l'Armenia e l'Azerbaijan.
I also express my concern for the tense situation in the South Caucasus between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and I urge the parties to arrive at the signing of a peace treaty. It is urgent that a solution be found to the dramatic humanitarian situation of those living in that region, while favoring the return of refugees to their own homes in legality and security, and with respect for the places of worship of the different religious confessions present there. These steps will help contribute to the building of a climate of trust between the two countries in view of the greatly desired peace. Turning our gaze to Africa, we are witnessing the suffering of millions of persons as a result of the numerous humanitarian crises that various sub-Saharan countries experience due to international terrorism, complex social-political problems, and the devastating effects of climate change. Added to these are the effects of the military coup d'etat that have occurred in several countries and certain electoral processes marked by corruption, intimidation, and violence.
In pari tempo rinnovo un appello per un serio impegno da parte di tutti I soggetti coinvolti.
At the same time, I renew my appeal for serious effort on the part of all engaged in the application of the November 2022 Pretoria Agreement, which put an end to the hostilities in Tigray. Likewise, for the pursuit of specific solutions to the tensions and violence that assail Ethiopia, and for dialogue, peace, and stability among the countries of the Horn of Africa. I would also like to bring up the tragic events in Sudan, where sadly, after months of civil war, no way out is in sight, and the plight of the refugees in Cameroon, Mozambique, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and South Sudan. I had the joy of visiting the latter two countries at the beginning of last year as a sign of my closeness to their people who are suffering, albeit in different contexts and situations. I express my heartfelt gratitude to the authorities of both countries for their efforts in organizing these visits and for their hospitality. My journey to South Sudan also had an ecumenical flavor, since I was joined by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, as a sign of the shared commitment of our ecclesial communities to peace and reconciliation.
Non vi siano guerre aperte nelle Americhe fra alcuni paesi, per esempio tra il Venezuela e la Guyana.
Although there are no open wars in the Americas, serious tensions exist between several countries, for example, Venezuela and Guyana, while in others, such as Peru, we see signs of a polarization that compromises social harmony and weakens democratic institutions. The situation in Nicaragua remains troubling. A protracted crisis with painful consequences for Nicaraguan society as a whole, and in particular for the Catholic Church. The Holy See continues to encourage a respectful diplomatic dialogue for the benefit of Catholics and the entire population.
Eccellenze, signore e signori, dietro questo quadro che ho voluto
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, against this backdrop that I have sketched without any pretension to completeness, we find an increasingly lacerated world, but even more, millions of persons, men, women, fathers, mothers, children, whose faces are for the most part unknown to us and frequently overlooked.
D'altra parte, le guerre moderne non si svolgono più solo sui campi di battaglia delimitati.
Moreover, modern wars no longer take place on a clearly defined battlefield, nor do they involve soldiers alone. In a context where it appears that the distinction between military and civil objectives is no longer respected, there is no conflict that does not end up in some way indiscriminately striking the civilian population. The events in Ukraine and Gaza are clear proof of this. We must not forget that grave violations of international humanitarian law are war crimes, and that it is not sufficient to point them out, but also necessary to prevent them. Consequently, there is a need for greater effort on the part of the international community to defend and implement humanitarian law, which seems to be the only way to ensure the defense of human dignity in situations of warfare. At the beginning of this year, the exhortation of the Second Vatican Council in Gaudium et Spes seems especially timely. On the question of warfare, there are various international conventions signed by many countries aimed at rendering military action and its consequences less inhuman. These agreements must be honored. Indeed, public authorities and specialists in these matters must do all in their power to improve these conventions and thus bring about a better and more effective curbing of the savagery of war.
Fine citazione. Anche quando si tratta di esercitare il diritto alla legittima difesa è indispensabile attenersi a un uso proporzionato della forza. Forse non ci rendiamo conto che le vittime civili
Perhaps we need to realize more clearly that civilian victims are not collateral damage, but men and women, with names and surnames, who lose their lives. They are children who are orphaned and deprived of their future. They are individuals who suffer from hunger, thirst, and cold, or are mutilated as an effect of the power of modern explosives. Were we able to look each of them in the eye, call them by name, and learn something of their personal history, we would see war for what it is. Nothing other than an immense tragedy, a useless slaughter, one that offends the dignity of every person on this earth.
D'altra parte, le guerre possono proseguire grazie all'enorme disponibilità di armi. Occorre perseguire una politica di
Wars, nonetheless, are able to continue thanks to the enormous stock of available weapons. There is need to pursue a policy of disarmament, since it is illusory to think that weapons have deterrent value. The contrary is true. The availability of weapons encourages their use and increases their production. Weapons create mistrust and divert resources. How many lives could be saved with the resources that today are misdirected to weaponry? Would it not be better to invest these resources in the pursuit of genuine global security? The challenges of our time transcend borders, as we see from the variety of crises of food, the environment, the economy, and healthcare that have marked the beginning of the century. Here I reiterate my proposal for a global fund that be established to finally eliminate hunger and to promote a sustainable development of the entire planet.
Poi tralasciare di menzionare quella provocata dagli arsenali nucleari e dallo sviluppo di ordigni.
Among the threats caused by these instruments of death, I cannot fail to mention those produced by nuclear arsenals and the development of increasingly sophisticated and destructive weapons. Here I once more affirm the immorality of manufacturing and possessing nuclear weapons. In this regard, I express my hope for the resumption, at the earliest possible date, of negotiations for the restart of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known as the Iran nuclear deal, to ensure a safer future for all.
Perseguire la pace, tuttavia, non è sufficiente limitarsi a rimuovere gli strumenti bellici.
To pursue peace, however, it is not enough simply to eliminate the implements of war. Its root causes must be eradicated. Foremost among these is hunger, a scourge that continues to afflict entire areas of our world, while others are marked by massive waste of food. Then there is the exploitation of natural resources, which enriches a few while leaving entire populations, the natural beneficiaries of these resources, in a state of destitution and poverty. Connected to this is the exploitation of people forced to work for low wages and lacking real prospects for professional growth. The causes of conflict also include natural and environmental disasters. To be sure, there are disasters that human beings cannot control. I think of the recent earthquakes in Morocco and China that resulted in hundreds of victims, as well as the severe earthquake that struck Turkey and part of Syria and took a terrible toll of death and destruction. I think, too, of the flood that struck Derna in Libya, effectively destroying the city, not least because of the simultaneous collapse of 2 dams.
Vi sono però I disastri che sono imputabili anche all'azione e all'incuria dell'uomo e che contribuiscono gravemente alla crisi climatica in atto.
Yet there are also disasters that are attributable to human activity or neglect and contribute seriously to the current climate crisis, such as the deforestation of the Amazon, the green lung of the earth. The climate and environmental crisis was the topic of the 28th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP28, held last month in Dubai. I regret that I was unable to participate personally. The conference began in conjunction with the World Meteorological Organization's announcement that 2023 was the warmest year on record in comparison with the 174 years previous. The climate crisis demands an increasingly urgent response and full involvement on the part of all, including the international community as a whole.
The
adoption of the final document at COP28 represents an encouraging step forward. It shows that, in the face of today's many crises, multilateralism can be renewed through the management of the global climate issue in a world where environmental, social, and political problems are closely connected. At COP28, it became clear that the present decade is critical for dealing with climate change. Care for creation and peace are the most urgent issues, and they are closely linked. For this reason, I express my hope that what was adopted in Dubai will lead to a decisive acceleration of the ecological transition through means to be achieved in 4 sectors: energy efficiency, renewable sources, the elimination of fossil fuels, and education in lifestyles that are less dependent on the latter.
Le guerre, la povertà, l'abuso della casa comune,
wars, poverty, the mistreatment of our common home, and the ongoing exploitation of its resources, which lead to natural disasters, also drive thousands of people to leave their homelands in search of a future of peace and security. In journeying, they risk their lives along dangerous routes, like those through the Sahara Desert, in the Darien Forest on the border between Colombia and Panama in Central America, in the north of Mexico, at the border with the United States, and above all on the Mediterranean Sea. Sadly, in the last 10 years, the Mediterranean has turned into a great cemetery, as tragedies continue to unfold, due also to unscrupulous human traffickers. Let us not forget that the great number of victims include many unaccompanied minors.
Il Mediterraneo dovrebbe essere piuttosto un laboratorio di pace.
The Mediterranean should instead be a laboratory of peace, a place where different countries and realities can encounter each other on the basis of the humanity we all share. I wish to emphasize this in Marseille during my apostolic journey for the Rencontres Méditerranéennes, the Mediterranean meetings, and I am grateful to the organizers and the French authorities for having made that journey possible. Faced with such an immense tragedy, we can easily end up closing our hearts, entrenching ourselves behind fears of an invasion. We are quick to forget that we are dealing with people with faces and names, and we overlook the specific vocation of this, our sea, Mare Nostrum, to be not a tomb, but a place of encounter and mutual enrichment between individuals, peoples, and cultures. This does not detract from the fact that migration should be regulated in order to accept, promote, and accompany and integrate migrants, while at the same time respecting the culture, sensitivities, and security of the peoples that accept responsibility for such acceptance and integration. We likewise need to insist on the right of people to remain in their homeland and the corresponding need to create the conditions for the effective exercise of this right. In confronting this challenge, no country should be left alone, nor can any country think of addressing the issue in isolation through more restrictive and repressive legislation adopted at times under pressure of fear or in pursuit of electoral consensus. In this regard, I welcome the commitment of the European Union to seek a common solution through the adoption of the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, while at the same time noting some of its limitations, especially concerning the recognition of the right to asylum and the danger of arbitrary detention.
Dear
ambassadors, the path to peace calls for respect for life, for every human life, starting with the life of the unborn child in the mother's womb, which cannot be suppressed or turned into an object of trafficking. In this regard, I deem deplorable the practice of so-called surrogate motherhood, which represents a grave violation of the dignity of the woman and the child, based on the exploitation of situations of the mother's material needs. A child is always a gift and never the basis of a commercial contract. Consequently, I express my hope for an effort by the international community to prohibit this practice universally. At every moment of its existence, human life must be preserved and defended. Yet I note with regret, especially in the West, the continued spread of a culture of death, which in the name of a false compassion discards children, the elderly, and the sick.
La via della pace esige il rispetto dei diritti umani, secondo quella semplice ma chiara formulazione contenuta nella Dichiarazione universale dei diritti umani, di cui abbiamo poco celebrato il 75° anniversario. Si tratta di principi razionalmente evidenti e comunemente
The path to
accettati.
peace calls for respect for human rights, in accordance with the simple yet clear formulation contained in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose 75th anniversary we recently celebrated. These principles are self-evident and commonly accepted. Regrettably, in recent decades, attempts have been made to introduce new rights that are neither fully consistent with the originally defined nor are always acceptable. They have led to instances of ideological colonization, in which gender theory plays a central role. The latter is extremely dangerous since it cancels differences in its claim to make everyone equal. These instances of ideological colonization prove injurious and create divisions between states rather than fostering peace. Dialogue, on the other hand, must be the soul of the international community. The current situation is also the result of the weakening of structures of multilateral diplomacy that arose after the Second World War. Organizations established to foster security, peace, and cooperation are no longer capable of uniting all their members around one table. There is a risk of a monadology, of a splintering into clubs that admit only states deemed ideologically compatible. Even agencies devoted to the common good and to technical questions, which have thus far proved effective, risk paralysis due to ideological polarization and exploitation by individual states. In order to relaunch a shared commitment to the service of peace, there is a need to recover the roots, the spirit, and the values that gave rise to those organizations, while at the same time taking into account the changed context and showing regard for those who do not feel adequately represented by the structures of international organizations.
Perseveranza e capacità di ascolto. Ma quando ci si adopera nel tentativo sincero di porre fine alle discussioni,
dialogue requires patience, perseverance, and an ability to listen. Yet when sincere attempts are made to put an end to disagreements, significant results can be achieved. One example that comes to mind is the Belfast Agreement, also known as the Good Friday Agreement, signed by the British and Irish governments, whose 25th anniversary was commemorated last year. Putting an end to 30 years of violent conflict, it can serve as an example to motivate and encourage authorities to trust in peace processes, whatever the hardships and sacrifices they entail. The way to peace is through political and social dialogue, since it is the basis for civil coexistence in a modern political community.
Le elezioni sono un momento fondamentale della vita di un paese.
2024 will witness elections being held in many nations. Elections are an essential moment in the life of any country, since they allow all citizens responsibly to choose their leaders.
Le parole di Pio XII. Esprimere
The words of Pope Pius XII remain as timely as ever. To express one's own view of the duties and sacrifices imposed on him or her, not to be compelled to obey without first being heard, these are two rights of the citizen which find expression in democracy, as its very name implies. From the stability, harmony, and good fruits produced by this contract between the citizens and the government of the state, one may recognize whether a democracy is truly sound and well-balanced, and perceive the vigor of its life and development.
It is important
then that citizens, especially young people who will be voting for the first time, consider it one of their primary duties to contribute to the advancement of the common good through a free and informed participation in elections. Politics, for its part, should always be understood not as an appropriation of power, but as the highest form of charity, and thus of service to one's neighbor within a local and national community. The path to peace also passes through interreligious dialogue, which before all else requires the protection of religious freedom and respect for minorities. It is painful to note, for example, that an increasing number of countries are adopting models of centralized control over religious freedom, especially by the massive use of technology. In other places, minority religious communities often find themselves in increasingly precarious situations. In some cases, they risk extinction due to a combination of terrorism, attacks on their cultural heritage, and more subtle measures such as the proliferation of anti-conversion laws, the manipulation of electoral rules, and financial restrictions.
E preoccupa particolarmente l'aumento degli atti di antisemitismo verificatisi negli ultimi mesi.
Of particular concern is the rise in acts of anti-Semitism in recent months. Once again, I would reiterate that this scourge must be eliminated from society, especially through education in fraternity and acceptance of others. Equally troubling is the increase in persecution and discrimination against Christians, especially over the last 10 years. At times, this involves non-violent, but socially significant cases of gradual marginalization and exclusion from political and social life, and from the exercise of certain professions, even in traditionally Christian lands.
Sono oltre 360 milioni cristiani nel mondo.
Altogether, more than 360 million Christians around the world are experiencing a high level of discrimination and persecution because of their faith, with more and more of them being forced to flee their homelands. Finally, the path to peace passes through education, which is the principal means of investing in the future and in young people. I have vivid memories of the celebration of World Youth Day in Portugal last August. As I renew my gratitude to the Portuguese authorities, civil and religious, for their hard work in organizing the event, I continue to treasure that encounter with more than 1 million young people from all over the world, brimming with enthusiasm and zest for life. Their presence was a great hymn to peace and a testimony to the fact that unity is greater than conflict and that it is possible to build communion amid disagreement. In recent times, the challenges faced by educators have come to include the ethical use of technologies. The latter can easily become a means of spreading division or lies, fake news. Yet they also serve as a source of encounter and mutual exchange, and an important vehicle for peace. The remarkable advances in new information technologies, particularly in the digital sphere, thus offer exciting opportunities and grave risks, with serious implications for the pursuit of justice and harmony among peoples.
Per questo motivo ho ritenuto importante.
For this reason, I thought it important to devote this year's message for the World Day of Peace to the subject of artificial intelligence, one of the most significant challenges for the years to come. It is essential that technological development take place in an ethical and responsible way, respecting the centrality of the human person, whose place can never be taken by an algorithm or a machine. The inherent dignity of each human being and the fraternity that binds us together as members of the one human family must undergird the development of new technologies and serve as indisputable criteria for evaluating them before they are employed, so that digital progress can occur with due respect for justice and contribute to the cause of peace. Consequently, careful reflection is required at every level, national and international, political and social, to ensure that the development of artificial intelligence remains at the service of men and women, fostering and not obstructing, especially in the case of young people, interpersonal relations, a healthy spirit of fraternity, critical thinking, and a capacity for discernment.
In tale prospettiva acquisiscono particolare rilevanza le due conferenze diplomatiche dell'Organizzazione Mondiale della Proprietà Intellettuale che avranno luogo nel 2024 e ai quali la Santa Sede.
In this regard, the two diplomatic conferences of the World Intellectual Property Organization, which will take place in 2024 with the participation of the Holy See as a member state, will prove particularly important. In the view of the Holy See, intellectual property is essentially directed to the promotion of the common good and cannot be detached from ethical requirements, lest situations of injustice and undue exploitation arise. Special concern must also be shown for the protection of the human genetic patrimony by prohibiting practices contrary to human dignity, such as the patenting of human biological material and the cloning of human beings. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year the Church is preparing for the Holy Year that will begin next Christmas. In a particular way, I express my gratitude to the Italian authorities, national and local, for their efforts in preparing the city of Rome to welcome great numbers of pilgrims and to enable them to draw spiritual fruit from their experience of the Jubilee. Today, perhaps more than ever, we need a holy year. Amid many causes of suffering that lead to a sense of hopelessness, not only in those directly affected, but throughout our societies. Amid the difficulties experienced by our young people, who instead of dreaming of a better future, often feel helplessness and frustrated. And amid the gloom of this world that seems to be spreading rather than receding, the Jubilee is a proclamation that God never abandons His people and constantly keeps open the doors to His kingdom. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Jubilee is a season of grace that enables us to experience God's mercy and the gift of peace. It is also a season of righteousness, in which sins are forgiven, reconciliation prevails over injustice, and the earth can be at rest. For everyone, Christians and non-Christians alike, the Jubilee can be a time when swords are beaten into plowshares, a time when one nation will no longer lift up sword against another, nor learn war anymore.
Carissimi, fratelli e sorelle, questo è l'augurio che formulo.
This, then, dear brothers and sisters, is my heartfelt wish for each of you, dear ambassadors, for your families and colleagues, and for the peoples you represent. Thank you, and a Happy New Year to all of you. And that concludes Pope Francis's speech to the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See. And now we see the ushers preparing a platform for Pope Francis to come and greet the ambassadors individually. And they come up to, the ambassadors come and prepare to greet the Pope. We can note that the Holy See maintains diplomatic relations.
Eccellenze, si invitano cortesemente i capi missione accompagnati dai rispettivi consorti a procedere verso l'incontro col Santo Padre e i superiori della Segreteria di Stato per il saluto personale, seguendo le direzioni fornite dai nostri addetti. Concluso il saluto, i capi missione sono pregati di recarsi senza consorti
inviting everyone to come up, all of the ambassadors, to greet the Holy Father. And we can note that the Holy See maintains diplomatic relations with 184 states that have full diplomatic relations. This additional, the European Union and the Sovereign Military Order of Malta are also included. The diplomatic missions accredited to the Holy See based in Rome, including those of the European Union and the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, they all number about 91.
The heads of missions are kindly requested to proceed without their spouses to the Sistine Chapel
and so,
for the group photograph.
As the Pope greets the many ambassadors, we can conclude this live broadcast of the greeting of Pope Francis to the diplomatic corps. I invite you to visit the Vatican News web portal, our Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube accounts for coverage of today's address, and other Vatican and world news. We will be back on Wednesday with a weekly general audience with Pope Francis that begins at around 9 a.m. Rome time. On behalf of Vatican Media, I would like to thank all of our media partners who have brought this broadcast to you, television and radio stations, and also to our in-studio technicians who've made this broadcast possible. These include especially our technical coordinator, Gustavo Messina, and Alessandro De Carolis for our audio coordinator, and to all of you for joining us. My name is Devin Watkins, and it has been a pleasure to provide the English language translation and commentary for this event of Pope Francis. Laudetur Jesus Christus, praised be Jesus Christ.
Shalom World, God's own channel.
More things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of. While echoing the essence of Christian spirituality, these words also reveal the foundation of what we call the Pope's prayer intentions. The idea of apostleship of prayer was originally proposed by Father Goat-Roulette S.J., which was later recognized by Pope Pius IX in 1849.